Hey there, DawgNation. I'm Cody Chaffins in for Kaylee Mansell this week on DawgNation at Large. Connor Riley, he's always here. And Kaylee off covering high school football this week. So she's got a legit excuse this time.
Yeah, Taylor Swift goes on a podcast. Kaylee can't be on hers, but we recognize that she's doing great work out there covering the great sport of high school football. And Cody and I will just try and take this podcast to new heights this week.
I tell you what, if only I could find my brother's girlfriend to just interview on a podcast. What a podcast it would be. High school football is special to you and me, Connor. We have shared the field. We never played at the same time, but both of us have been out there. Both of us offensive linemen, which you can probably tell, at least by my physique still, probably not by Connor's. But there you are. So I'm on the left playing for the Chambly Bulldogs. And is that you on the right, 65, Connor?
That is me on the right, 65. You're starting center for the Centennial Knights. Just great memories. Well, not all great, but just an incredible time, an incredible sport that I think anyone that interacts with high school football so deeply appreciates and values. That's why you see people like BA, you see people like Kaylee going to such great lengths to cover it as I hide and cover my face there. But yeah, high school football, it's deeply important. It's starting back up this week, and I could not be prouder of what I did and what I accomplished in that phase of my life.
So there are still times when you're just driving around somewhere and somebody's cutting the grass and the smell hits you, and it takes me right back to like, we could do two. Back in my day, we're going to start that. We could do 2-a-days. It takes you back to 2-a-days. And then I also did some work for the AJC doing their Super 11. I got to travel around, and that smell of the locker rooms, I'm happy to report, in 20 years has not changed. The locker rooms are much nicer, but that smell is still there.
That you would hope that, Buford and their $62 million stadium, they at least figured out some way to cover the less appealing sights and smells that come with high school football. But to your point, Cody, as much as society has changed over the years, there's still something about that Friday Night Lights.
And we are still hoping that this show doesn't stink for you today. Let's kick it off. It's DawgNation at Large.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
Appreciate Kaylee letting me fill in for her this week on the show. We got a lot to get to. We're going to hit a handful of dogs for whom it is now or never. It is time to really show what they can do. We'll hit that topic right off the top. We'll also talk about what we want to see coming out of Scrimmage 2 for the Dogs this weekend. What are some of the storylines, position groups we're really looking forward to there? We're also going to hit our staple of Meme Machine each and every week, the best of what the internet has to offer. And then have a little fun at the end of the show today as we talk about, is it real or is it filtered? You never tell on the internet these days. Could be real AI, real or filtered. You never know. So we're going to hit that at the end of the show as well. But we will start, Connor, with the idea, as old Elvis Presley liked to say, it's now or never, right? I don't want to sing too much. We'll get a YouTube strike. That was very close to Elvis. But there are some dogs out there that it's kind of time, right? You've been in the program a while. This is time to step up.
Yeah, these are guys who, especially for as much as we've heard this fall about how young this Georgia team is, there are quite a few veterans out there who I think are waiting to either make a big mark or really break through in some cases for the first time and show that they can be contributing football players for this team in 2025.
And I think part of it, too, is because of all of the talent that Georgia has brought in, right? The blue chip number's never been higher for this team. So there's guys going to be pushing some of these guys for their spots. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. The first one is not a huge surprise to dog fans out there. Many would say, yeah, let's see a step up from last year. It's now or never. And that would be wide receiver Dylan Bell. Last year just struggled. It was, if you watch his PFF grades, they just hit downward slope the entire season long. Now, part of that, he was playing a little bit out of position as they had losses at the wide receiver position, but also the drops. More drops last year than he had in his first 2 seasons combined. It's now or never for Dylan Bell, Connor.
Yeah, I think Georgia asked just a little too much of Dylan Bell last season. And if there's any one player that really, I think, was hurt by the suspensions and dismissals at wide receiver, you could make the case it was Carson Beck, but I actually think Dylan Bell had maybe a bigger, fall off in production than what he potentially could have done. Because you think even when Georgia had Colby Young in that Alabama game, Dylan Bell had a big touchdown late in that game and they were able to find a way to scheme him open. And so we know Dylan can play winning football. He's won a national title on that 2022 team. And he's got the ability to play all the wide receiver positions at Georgia. We know he can play running back as well. I think if he's got the ability to stick in one spot, to stick at wide receiver this year, I think that's going to help him. I still believe in Dylan and what he brings to this team. He's a valued leader. It is interesting to note, though, that for all the positive buzz we've heard about the wide receivers thus far in fall camp, not a ton of it has necessarily come around Dylan. And I don't know if he's going to be a starter for this team in terms of the guy first one out there, or if he's going to lead the teams in receptions. But if the Georgia offense is to take a step forward, it's going to need Dylan Bell to at least be his most consistent self in 2025.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk this spring. Kirby had talked about how Dylan came to him and said, I'm willing to change positions. Doesn't seem like that. We haven't heard any more about that. Seems like that's kind of dead in the water.
Yeah, I think the addition of Josh McCray sort of helps give Georgia better running back depth there. Also, and I'm going to knock on wood, they're pretty healthy at running back right now, with McCray being the exception. And so if the numbers start to dwindle a little bit, maybe that's where you see them insert Dylan Bell there. But Bo Walker, I think emerging in the way he has helped throw some cold water on Dylan Bell potentially playing running back for this team.
All right, you talked about the running back position. You talked about the injuries. That takes us to our other offensive player. It's kind of now or never, and that would be Roderick Robinson. We heard so much about him in the spring of 2024, then had the injury coming into last season. The only time we saw him was the last couple games of the season. That would be against Georgia Tech. That would be against Texas in the SEC championship. But like you said, the backfield seems to be getting more and more crowded. Is that why it's now or never, you think, for Rod Robinson?
Yeah, look, you saw Branson Robinson transfer out this past offseason in large part due to injuries, and you sort of start to wonder, is that the sort of same fate that Roderick Robinson is ultimately going to suffer? You mentioned the Georgia Tech game a year ago. I thought he looked really good in that game, especially for a guy who hadn't played a ton of football that season, dealt with knee injuries. And then, unfortunately for Roderick, going into that Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, he suffers an ankle injury, and that really knocks him out for most of spring practice. Now, with Josh McCray, who we mentioned earlier, the transfer from Illinois, not getting off to a great start here in fall camp, that's opened some things up potentially for Roderick Robinson. But we mentioned Bo Walker. It sounds like Chauncey Bowens had a really good scrimmage this past Saturday. And so for Roderick Robinson, look, Georgia very much wants a physical running back who can churn out those 4 to 5 yard carries at a time. He's got the potential to do that. But if he's not going to stay healthy, Georgia can't really count on him. And they've gone to lengths, whether it be Bo Walker last year, Josh McCray via the transfer portal, to add around him, especially when you have a guy like Nate Frazier, who they expect so much of going into the 2025 season.
He's one of those guys, too. We saw the pictures come out of him lifting weights last offseason. You just start salivating, get so excited about what he could do back there. Hopefully he can stay healthy and kind of put up this year as it would be. All right, on the defensive side of the ball, guys, it's now or never for, and we've got a couple names here. The first one, Raylan Wilson, kind of like Rod Robinson, where there's so many guys we're talking about at his position. He's been there a while now. You're going to fight to get playing time now.
Yeah, Raylan, I think, is a little bit more in the Dylan Bell camp than necessarily the Roderick Robinson camp, because Raylan has gone out and played. He started, or at least played with the first team in each of his first 2 seasons at Georgia. But we've seen CJ Allen really pop and develop and I think blossom into a star. I don't know that we've yet seen Raylan Wilson do that. Obviously, he had a big fumble recovery last year in the win over Kentucky, but we haven't consistently seen the wild plays. And when watching Raylan on film, a lot of times it seems like he is a step slow to being where he needs to be. And I don't think that is a fault of his athleticism, but rather just his mental processing. So as he enters this 3rd year, look, he and CJ Allen are the leaders in that linebacker room, and they're going to be expected to play a lot. But with Raylan, the thing to really monitor is you've got Chris Cole and you've got Justin Williams behind him. And those guys, as Kirby Smart has said time and time again, play with so much fire, passion, and energy. They're not going to let up until they're on the field. So with a guy like Raylan Wilson, yes, he's going to be someone who contributes this season, but if he's really going to pop, it's going to have to be now, because I don't know how long you can expect guys like Chris Cole and Justin Williams to wait in the wings when you have someone like Raylan Wilson ahead of them.
It's so interesting because CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson, they are kind of linked at the hip. They're very good friends, but we're kind of both thrown into the fire as freshmen at the same time, taking on Ole Miss. I remember that game. And like you said, we kind of talk about them in different ways now, even though they've been kind of linked and should be on this same kind of progression. I think a lot of folks are talking C.J. Allen. Could he be a first-round draft pick next year? That talk's not there for Raylan Wilson. It is really interesting how that's developed over the years. Final guy on this Georgia defense who we think it's now or never for, Janelle Aguero. Janelle came in, such a heralded recruit, and the injuries kept him off the field last year, but he ended last year with his two best games. If you look to those PFF stats against Texas and against Notre Dame, so it was kind of on the upswing. Maybe he can carry that into 25.
Yeah, I think with Janelle, look, injuries really prevented him from getting going last year. Early in the season against Clemson, and then late in the year, you see there that UMass game, he had surgery on his hand, and that just, I think, really bothered him, especially late in the season. And then the interesting thing with Janelle this offseason, they bring in these transfer defensive backs. They bring in Adrian Maddox out of UAB, Zion Branch out of USC, and then Jaden Harris out of Miami. Those guys are going to play both star and safety. And I think that's done in part to push Jonell to be the best version of himself and be a guy that they're going to be able to have on the field the entire time. I think they like what Jonell brings in terms of a run defender, especially from that star spot. The big thing with him, and if he's going to make that leap and be an every down contributor for Georgia this year and hold off guys like Maddox and Branch, he's going to need to be on the field for those passing downs and be able to hold up in coverage and be athletic and make plays in that way. I will note his career a little bit follows the path of Tyke Smith, another guy at that star position who really paved the way and showed what you can do at that position. Came in very hyped up, obviously Tyke transferring in from West Virginia, but injuries really slowed him down. He didn't develop those first 2 years, I think, the way a lot of people thought. But by that third season, he was one of the better, if not the most impactful member of that 2023 Georgia defense. I think from that star position, Janelle has a chance to do that this coming season. And if he's able to emerge and become an every down player, this secondary goes from a very good one already in my mind with what they have at corner and safety to potentially the best in the country with you factor in KJ Bolden, you factor in Dalen Everett, and then whoever ends up taking that other cornerback spot, whether it be Daniel Harris or Ellis Robinson.
Yeah, he's like Raylan Wilson. I've seen a lot of football now. Things should be moving a lot slower for those guys in this Georgia defense. What's really interesting, I think back to a year ago this time, and we put out so much content on DawgNation.com and our DawgNation YouTube channel. I think back, I'm sure there was a topic, players that pop. I can think of these like videos that we all shot, and I think every one of these guys was on like, this is the player who's going to pop this year going into the 24 season. I know you had high expectations for Dylan Bell last season. I think about Rod Robinson. Mike was heavy on the Rod Robinson train. Janelle Aguero, I think BA did a whole DawgNation Daily on how this is going to be Janelle Aguero's time. And Raylan Wilson, again, we expected him to keep doing better and better things. Do you feel like it's something like everybody just missed, just wishful thinking? And does that give us pause as we look for players that will pop this year?
Yeah, these guys are post-hype sleepers where we all think, I think in a variety of ways, last year was going to be the year that those guys sort of pop, because of the way that they were seen as recruits. Raylan Wilson was a higher rated recruit than CJ Allen was. And I know recruiting rankings aren't everything, but I think that speaks to what the potential for Raylan was. And not just, Raylan. Janelle was a highly rated recruit. Roderick Robinson was a major recruiting win in that 2023 cycle. And some of this is just the way where we do so much content that, we're going to have guys that we label as breakout guys that don't always end up hitting. But to your point, Cody, maybe the fact that those guys didn't hit the way that we thought they would a season ago only helps further explain why Georgia's season a season ago, while they still accomplished a lot and did some good things, which I think you can say about various guys on that list, it didn't necessarily end the way that it wanted to. And it felt like that Georgia team a season ago didn't reach its full potential.
You kind of mentioned Tyke Smith there. I'm interested, are there other players you can think about for Georgia that were just kind of coasting, not coasting along, but kind of moving along under the radar, and then that last year just kind of took a big jump?
I think Jared Wilson is maybe someone like that. Now, he had a lot of guys in front of him that prevented him from playing, but he goes out there year one as a starter, impresses, plays really well, ends up being a top 100 draft pick, and is ultimately going to end up starting for the New England Patriots this year. So I think someone like him comes to mind there. Lawson Lucky a little bit. This time a year ago, remember, they bring in Benjamin Jurasik from Stanford. You have Oscar Delp, who's ready to take on a bigger role from Brock Bowers moving on. And it was actually Lawson Lucky as a sophomore who led the Georgia tight ends in receiving yards. So there are guys that can sometimes fall through the cracks a little bit, whether it be on the younger side or even like, say, a season ago, Jared Wilson on the older side, who finally had everything come together for him.
Yeah, I think James Cook was one of those guys that every year we were like, all right, this is going to be the year. It's going to be the year. And then finally we were like, okay, we'll see what happens. And then he like exploded his final year there, and it's obviously done really well for himself in the NFL. So it will be interesting to keep an eye on these guys and see if they can, because it seems like one of those things is for sure, if they are not producing this year, there are guys behind them that Kirby Smart will be inserting into the lineup.
Absolutely. You can go through each one of those positions. Running back, Bo Walker, wide receiver, Talon Taylor, linebacker, Chris Cole or Justin Williams, even Zayden Walker, take your pick there. And then Adrian Maddox, does a Todd Robinson in year 2, a Rayshawn Dinkins. What do those guys do and look like going into this season?
All right, so we'll see if those guys, if it's now or never for all of those dogs. In just a minute, we're going to talk about Scrimmage 2 and what we're hoping to see and hear afterwards for the dogs in that scrimmage as they get ready for Marshall coming up on August 30th. Before we do that, I want to thank Zagoria Law Firm for being a part of the show each and every week here on DawgNation at Large. Just opened up the newspaper the other day and saw another terrible dog bite case. And these are the cases that Zagoria Law is made for. They have literally written the book on how to fight for you in dog bite or dog knockdown cases. So you go call 833-GA-DOGBITE or visit ZagoriaLaw.com. If you or a loved one or somebody you know has been affected by somebody else's dog, you turn to David Zagoria and the Zagoria Law Firm. And again, that is 833-GA-DOGBITE or ZagoriaLaw.com for more on that today. And let's do some dog bites. All right, so scrimmage 1, boy, for a closed scrimmage, we sure got a lot of details, and not from Kirby Smart, but everybody else seemed to have all the details of what happened in scrimmage 1, and a lot comes out. What's so interesting about this is depending on who's watching these scrimmages are the reports you get, right? So if it's big-time donors, well, they're not exactly, football coaches, so they're maybe watching it a different way. Other people have other sources, I'm sure, as well, but it kind of does frame how we all look at things because, like we said, Kirby Smart didn't give us much after that first scrimmage.
I'm just slowly hoping that one day, Kirby's so tired of the leaks, he just, decides to reverse course with everything he's done and let reporters come and watch scrimmage themselves. That way we're not getting second and third hand sourcing on these things, and we have a truly, I think, better idea of how things actually went.
There was a day when, like, the coaches, Mark Richt, I can remember walking into the room and giving stats on the scrimmage. It doesn't happen anymore. And even Kirby's like, he did okay, when we know a guy had an excellent day. All right, so as we look ahead to the second scrimmage and some of the things we are looking to hear about, that would be injuries. Injuries, knock on wood, have not been a huge factor so far in this camp. I think last week, Kirby Smart, one of the things he did tell us, Malachi Tolliver's dealing with the foot. But that's like all we've heard about injuries. That seems to be so far so good on that front.
Right, and it's such a 180 from where Georgia was this time a year ago, where you were dealing with guys early in the season picking up injuries. And even before that Alabama game, you had Michael Williams pick up an injury. You had Tate Ratledge deal with an injury. That defensive line never was really healthy in the early part of that season. And so Georgia's able to weather the storm a little bit here, and they're able to get through this scrimmage clean and stay healthy. I think that's really big for a team. Now, granted, they don't open this season with a traditional big game like in years past you've seen with a Clemson or an Oregon. And if they're able to get healthy for a young team that needs to come together and needs as many reps as it can have, I think that's huge. Conversely, you look at a team like Florida, it seems like every other day there's injury news coming out about them. I think that really hurts a team going into this season. So the fact that you're able to stay healthy through the month of August, I think is really big, especially for a young team where these guys are still able to get a lot of the key learning reps. Whereas once you get in season, you're focusing more on each individual opponent on a week-by-week basis. And
it sounded like that first scrimmage, they were really getting after it. I mean, there was a lot of tackling, and Kirby talked a lot about how they weren't tackling up to snuff, and he wants to see that. But that will taper off as they get closer to the season to end season. It'll just be the kind of that thud, and we're not taking people to the ground. So it's not like they're not getting after it, but they're just lucky so far with the injuries.
Yeah, and especially when one of the two big talking points from the offensive and defensive sides are, the offensive side, we want to run the ball. Well, you got to be physical to do that. Defensively, they got to tackle better. You've actually got to hit and tackle people, and that does open up some injuries to there in that regard. So I think that is something to monitor going into the second scrimmage. How physical are they? And when we get to hear from Kirby Smart on this, and how did the tackling improve? Because If both those boxes can get checked and Georgia can still be healthy, that is a massive, massive win for Georgia in fall camp.
All right, so there was a lot of talk about the transfers, and we'll get to that in just a minute after Scrimmage 1. But Scrimmage 1, tell me about the freshmen you want to hear about this week. And I don't feel like we heard a ton about, correct me if I'm wrong, about the freshmen in that first scrimmage.
Yeah, I think the exception is maybe Juan Gaston, and that's because of the hole that is open on the offensive line there. But you didn't hear a ton necessarily about Zayden Walker, a guy I mentioned earlier. Elijah Griffin didn't really pop. You know, it was interesting to people that J.J. Hanna was playing with the first-team defense. It's not necessarily true that he was excelling out there, but they've got a lot of guys that I think can come in and play right away. You look at a guy like Talon Taylor. Georgia's going to have about 6 wide receivers they play in their rotation. If Taylor can crack that rotation, I think that's going to say a lot about his ability and his potential for Georgia in 2025. Bo Walker is another guy we mentioned earlier, had a huge spring, has done okay so far in fall camp. The noise maybe hasn't been as big around him as there have been some other running backs. And then even at tight end, you look at a guy like an Elias Williams. What can you see from him? Can he push a Jaden Riddell, even an Oscar Delp potentially for playing time? At the skill player positions in particular, I'm very interested in seeing how these guys come out and play during their second scrimmage. Now that they've got their feet under them and have a little bit better of an idea of what to expect moving forward.
Yeah, cruising through some of the pictures that Georgia put out from the scrimmage, you just see Talon Taylor making a catch or two. What that means and, you know, how all that looks is really the other interesting. You talk about J.J. Hanna with the fire, passion, and energy Guardian cap on there was another interesting thing to see. All right, offensive guard battle. We heard again, next to nothing from Kirby Smart this week. They asked him, he gave us about 2 sentences. He did say he wants to see size and mass there. Well, you got size and mass with some of the guys that are all working to try and secure that right guard spot.
Yeah, the Whisper campaign is pushing very strongly for Juan Gaston right now. And I think it'll be interesting, especially when you get to Tennessee, when you get to Alabama. That's what I'm really going to take note of, who's in at that right guard position and how often someone is playing. Because with Juan in particular, there's been so much talk about his weight, his conditioning, and getting everything in check in that regard, which leaves open the door for a Daniel Calhoun, for a Michael Inouye. And the fact that neither of those guys have really separated at that job at this point, I think is a big reason why Gaston has a chance to ultimately go on and win that starting right guard job. But it only takes one great practice and one bad practice to really swing this one way or the other. And the reality is, Georgia's going to want all 3 of these guys, because we saw last year, injuries were such an issue for the Georgia offensive line. And if you have 3 guys who can potentially come in and help you at the guard spot, while that's not an ideal situation to be in when you're having to rotate in all those guys, I think it'll help this line tremendously as they look to form a more cohesive unit in 2025.
Yeah, and you think about that spot as well. We've seen Georgia, I feel like, and maybe other programs I just don't notice, rotate the offensive lineman more, it feels like, than anybody else. That right guard spot seems like somewhere where it could be Daniel Calhoun, you get this drive, and then the next guy goes in for the next drive, and you got Drew Bobo next to you, you got that would be Ernest Green, right, on that right tackle spot. Veteran. So they can go, hey, man, this is what we're doing. You know, even if you don't know the play as a freshman or there's some stuff going on, they know they can look out for that guy when you've got the offensive coordinator's son and a guy who's been on the field for 3 seasons.
Absolutely.
All right, next one. More defensive line news. That was kind of we saw the video Georgia put out. Christian Miller makes a big tackle there. But that was like it. And we on this program, when I filled in, I think the last time, we talked about those other defensive tackles we wanted to start hearing about. Nazir Johnson, Xavier McLeod, Nnamdi Ogboko. Those guys are the guys that are really going to have to fill in the depth on the defensive line this year. We know the frontline guys are probably going to be pretty strong, but we didn't hear much about anybody else.
Yeah, and to your point, Cody, the fact that Christian Miller is the only defensive lineman we see making a play, it's kind of worrying to me, just in the sense that, like, you know what you have in Christian Miller. He's the most established player on this defensive line. They're going to need other guys to go out there and play and contribute. I'm not saying they need to necessarily go out there and be stars and quote-unquote earn a starting spot, but you need to have guys that you can trust, and you need to have guys that can go out there and make plays and do what they're asked to do. And so, you know, Jordan Hall, you'd love to hear him having a big scrimmage and him being disruptive. And one of the things with these scrimmages, you know, if one position has a great day, that probably means who they were going against means they didn't necessarily have the best time. And it sounds like while the offensive line is doing well and things are moving in a great direction there, which I think is much needed news after how last season ended, the defensive line is my biggest concern going into this season, just with what we've seen from Georgia and how they've gone about winning championships. And coming out of this first scrimmage, I actually came away even somehow more worried about what this unit might look like in 2025 than necessarily we were even going into it.
The only thing I'll say about this, and it's kind of what we talked about earlier, is think of the folks who are leaking this information, right? These are donors. It's easy to see Christian Miller break through the line and make a tackle in the backfield. But if a guy just kind of stuffs the run at the line of scrimmage and Bo Walker or, Nate Frazier gets to the line and has nowhere to go, is that a win in the defensive lineman's book? Maybe that's a positive play, but I don't know that that's going to stick out to the average fan who's kind of seeing 22 guys running all over the place. And even, there's times where I'll shoot a game from field level and you're not sure who made the tackle and what really was the case there. So that's the only reason I would say maybe consider the source on some of that.
Absolutely. And you think of the way the Georgia defensive line so famously wants to play. 2 on me, someone's free. They want their defensive linemen to hold up blocks, to open up holes for linebackers to go and shoot through. And so Georgia, having the linebacker room that they have, I think maybe leans into that a little bit, but you want to hear, hey, I thought Joseph Jonah-Ajayi looked really good out there today. To your point, Nasir Johnson, Nnamdi Ogboko, those guys were doing things on the interior of the defensive line and making things difficult for the Georgia offense. Because if this team's going to win in 2025, this defensive line is going to have to make a massive leap from where it is starting the season to where it could potentially be at the end of the year.
And I also think there were a lot of eyes on Elijah Griffin, right? Wherever he goes, everybody wants to see what's going on with number 90 out there. So we want to hear good things there. All right, final one will be the wide receivers who, by all reports that we've heard, I think even Kirby, did Kirby confirm that Noah Thomas had a long touch? I've heard that like so many different places. And Zach Branch did a lot of really impressive things as well. So we can see those guys do more big things. That's good.
Yeah, it sounds like coming out of that first scrimmage, Colby Young, Noah Thomas, Zach Branch, all in great spots going into the season. There's been consistently strong buzz about London Humphreys and the way that he has been able to practice and do all sorts of things for Georgia this year. We touched earlier on the show on Dylan Bell, who you see on your screen right there. I just find it hard to believe that he's not going to be a key piece of this wide receiver rotation this year, even if he is not necessarily having the best fall camp. And so for me, Georgia usually likes to play about 6 wide receivers and have 6 guys that consistently plays and shuffles in. Who's going to take that 6th spot? Who's going to go out there and make plays this coming Saturday and show what they can do? Because odds are it's probably going to have to be someone on the younger side. Can we see a Sokovi White take a step forward and go out there and make some plays? We mentioned Talon Taylor earlier in the freshman segment, what he's able to do. I think CJ Wiley is another guy who deserves mention there. This is a dart throw of a name and something that is probably going to monitor later in the season. Thomas Blackshear has earned some very nice praise this season. Now, he came in the summer, and that's usually not a great recipe for playing right away, especially at a wide receiver position. But the conversation around Blackshear at least has been in-ringing enough to me where I'm monitoring what he's doing in this scrimmage this Saturday. And if he has a big day, can he force himself into that Georgia rotation where it sounds like the veterans or the guys that have played significant college football before are doing all the things that you want to see from this group.
And one of the other things about that, and really for all of these positions, people talk so much about, Georgia doesn't have a Clemson to start the year. Does that change the way these guys are approaching things? To me, if you're one of these guys who is the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th wide receiver, I need to move myself up the depth chart even one spot, because all of a sudden at the end of the Marshall game or in the second half of the Austin Peay game, these are guys who are going to be able to get reps, and you want to be higher on the depth chart to be the guy who gets his number called when the second half of that game comes around and everybody's getting into the game. So to me, that would push the middle of the pack a little bit harder maybe than the frontline starter said, oh, we got to get ready for this one. No, I'm competing with the guy right next to me to get playing time because I know playing time is going to be available in week 1 and week 2.
To your point, Cody, I think it's a great thing for this team this year with how young they are, with how much guys I think have to go out there and improve, and that's why you've heard so much talk about fire, passion, and energy. That they're opening with a Marshall, that they're opening with an Austin Peay, where even in the second half of that game, if Georgia's able to get out to big leads in both of those, they're going to be able to play guys and sort of see what they have. Whereas if you're taking on a Clemson, we mentioned Oregon in the years past, they're going to open with Louisville, Florida State moving forward. Those games are just different animals, and you're just looking to get a win that day. With Marshall and Austin Peay, with this team being this young and this mid-pack, as you sort of mentioned there, not just a wide receiver, but across the roster, It's a massive, massive opportunity for them, and how these guys set themselves up in their second scrimmage, I think is going to go a long way determining what it ultimately looks like when the games are for real in late August and early September.
Do you think that played into last year when you get to the UMass games and some of these Mississippi State, these games that should have been blowouts and it didn't seem like it got there? Was that because there's older guys in there and they're like, I know I can roll the football out and win?
And I know that that's one of the real regrets, Cody, from last season, that the Mississippi State game was as close as it was in the second half. And the UMass game, Georgia just didn't really come ready to play. And that hurt that team later in the year when injuries mounted, and you didn't have young players who had the opportunity, who had the reps to play real football, even if it is against lesser competition. Those reps are still incredibly valuable. And so I think Kirby understands that. And that's why I'd be really, really surprised this season with the Marshall game, with that Austin Peay game, if Georgia doesn't come out buttoned up, ready to go from the start. I'm not saying they're going to show exotic looks and really tilt their hand for what they might have against Tennessee and Alabama, but from playing hard, from everything we've heard this camp, that's going to be a major point of emphasis going into these first two games for Georgia.
And final point on the wide receivers, it does seem like night and day from last summer when, Brandon Adams like, hey man, we're not hearing anything about these wide. That cannot be good. We're hearing so much now. That seems to be a better sign.
Yeah, and to that point, that proved to be a harbinger of what was to come during the season. They enter with Ra Thomas being dismissed, and now you just see where they are. I think there's a chance that this wide receiver room, look, there's going to be a lot on the arm of Gunnar Stockton, but this is just sort of the way college football can be sometimes, where some years, you don't have all the pieces line up rightly, and where last year you think if Carson Beck had this wide receiver room, what would that team have looked like? But I think they recognize that, hey, we need more from our wide receivers last year from the lessons that they learned, and they made sure that Gunnar Stockton isn't going to be in the same position that Carson Beck was last year.
All right, we'll see what happens scrimmage too. You better believe DawgNation.com and our YouTube channels will have all the reaction that we are hearing. And like we said, from scrimmage one, we got a lot of insiders, a lot of places. We'll be sharing all that information with you as well. Now, Georgia gets those first 2 weeks. They got to be buttoned up, though, when they take the trip to Rocky Top on September 13th. And we here at DawgNation have got to be buttoned up as we take the trip to Rocky Top on September 13th. We've already got a big day planned. It includes our DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. Excited about getting on the riverboat. We did it back in 2023. It led Georgia to a blowout win over Tennessee, so we'll be doing it again. We have got a riverboat that just DawgNation will be on, going up and down the river. We got the food, we got the drink, we got those barking dog people on there, and all of that Vol Navy is just going to turn green and even uglier orange with envy as they see us cruising up and down past Neyland Stadium before the game. You want to get on there with us? You can do that. Sign up today, DawgNation.com/tailgate. Why do you want to do it now? Don't wait for another couple weeks, because the first 125 folks who sign up are going to get this sweet shirt. Look at it in red. It says Sink Rocky Top. It's almost got the bulldog like a pirate ship there. I love that. And it's going to be beautiful weather to be out. It was a little bit later in the year in 23. September in Knoxville, Tennessee, cruising on the river. That is going to be awesome. So you want to get your shirt right there as well, because they're doing that checkerboard thing at Neyland, I think, that day. You want to have red in there to disrupt everything. So get your red Sink Rocky Top shirt by signing up for our DawgNation invasion. You can do that. DawgNation.com/tailgate. You can get your tickets there today. All right, it is time for Meme Machine.
Who's that going down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a Meme Machine around the block. It's a Meme Machine around the block.
All right, time for Meme Machine. Once we get into the season, I feel like the ones on the front of the train every week, I'm like, I want to see more of those. We'll get those once the games get started here, but it's the best things we've seen on the internet this week. Connor, we will start with you this week.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit triggering for some Georgia fans out there, just given what happened in the Notre Dame game. But in a Rams-Cowboys preseason game this past weekend, CeeDee Lamb standing on the sideline, not really paying attention, just gets blasted by an official running down the sideline. And, everyone makes a big deal of it. Clint Lamb, former coworker of mine at SEC Country, brings up the famous Once Upon a Time in Hollywood gif of Leo pointing at the screen, referring obviously to Parker Jones, who unfortunately knows all too well what it is like when a referee runs into you on the sideline. That is a 15-yard penalty. That is sideline interference. Now, CeeDee Lamb, maybe, not accustomed to being on the sidelines when the Cowboys offense is out there on the field. But for a Georgia fan, man, we had all seen this before and what this meant, and brought back tough times for, you've heard him here first on DawgNation at Large, Parker Jones and the former Georgia walk-on.
Yeah, I can't decide if this is good for Parker Jones or bad for Parker. Like, had we all kind of moved on and forgotten about it? Maybe, but now it's getting brought up one more time. But CeeDee Lamb, he took it right there in the back, man. That could put him on the IR for a little while if he gets hit by that. It seemed like in the other one, the referee got the worst of it. This time it was definitely the player who got the worst of it. But yes, Parker Jones lives on DawgNation at Large. All right, time for my meme this week. It comes from our good friend George Foster, former Dog, who posts this. It says, oh boy, this is Jalen Walker taking on the Lions, and they're sending the entire school, not the school, I guess the entire team at him to try and block him. There's been a lot of reports that Jalen Walker not off to an incredible start with the Falcons. It looks like he's already garnered the respect of the other team.
Yeah, I think Jalen Walker is going to be just fine. Mentally, what he brings to the next level. Look, and as the president of the Jalen Walker fan club, I'm not deterred by everything we've seen. And the fact that, look, he's a first-round pick, there's a lot of attention that comes with that, along with the first time that he is a Georgia player has ever been a first-round pick for the Atlanta Falcons. There's just added pressure, but I don't think that there is a better person and player equipped to handle those expectations.
Sheds the first block, gets off the second block to get that inside arm free, and then makes the tackle. So, yeah, I think he's doing just fine, everybody. Everybody just take a deep breath and relax. Number 11, if he's shown us anything, he will be just fine out there, and he'll be making plays for the Falcons this year. Excited about that. All right, we're going to try a new segment this week. Connor brought this one up. Reasons being because there's so much stuff on the internet now. Kind of started with selfies on Instagram, but there's so much, it's hard to tell if it's real or it's filtered. So we're going to go with some storylines for this upcoming season, and you and I will decide, are they real or are they filtered? I'll let you go with the first one here.
Texas is the best team in the country. They were the number one team in both the coaches and AP poll to open the season. That is the first time in program history. There was a rather curious story written on The Athletic about Texas being, quote unquote, the new Alabama. Cody, entering 2025.
Alabama wins SEC championships, don't they?
Is this real or filter that Texas is the number one team in college football?
Now, here's the thing. I don't think this is one of these filters where it's doing everything, right? Like, you're not an ugly person and it's making you looking like a supermodel. But I do think there's definitely some makeup getting put on here, maybe some fake lipstick. It's fixing your hair a little bit, making you look a little bit younger. So I think Texas is a very good team. Best team in America, like they've been voted in these polls. I think that is a little filtered.
I would agree with you there. A lot of this, I think, stems from Arch Manning and the hype around him and the sky-high expectations that he has to go out there and play well. That Texas team loses a lot from last year's team. They've had to replace their top two defensive tackles 2 years in a row, 4 starters on the offensive line, a ton of production at the wide receiver room. There's going to be a lot on the shoulders of Arch Manning to go out there and play well. And look, maybe it's what my own algorithm is feeding me, but I've seen a lot of old Patriots-Colts games from Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and how they matched up against each other. Peyton Manning had a lot of bad games against elite defenses early in his career in big spots. And so obviously Peyton being Arch's uncle, let's just slow down right now in crowning a Texas program that still has not won the SEC, much less winning a national title.
All right, so that kind of along those same lines, I'll go Florida's back. Real or filtered?
Back in the hospital, back in the emergency room, it seems like right now, just they've got so many guys dealing with injuries. LJ McCray, Dallas Wilson, DJ Lagway, who knows what his practice status is going to be on a week-by-week basis. There's good talent in Florida, but when you factor in the injuries that they've had to deal with during fall camp already and the schedule that they're going to have to play, where to open the season, they go at LSU, now they get 2 easy cupcake games before that, but September 13th on 4 straight games of at LSU, at Miami, bye week, home against Texas, at Texas A&M. That is a gauntlet that they're going to have to try and navigate. And there's a real war. Now, I don't know if this all plays out this way, where they're 2-4 through 6 games. And because of the injuries, You're just losing valuable practice time. So because of that, while I think Billy Napier has done a good job weathering the storm, things are just not setting up for them to be very successful this year. And I'm going to have to say that this is a filter that Florida is back to the Florida that at least when Cody and I were, playing high school football, they used to be.
Right. The gauntlet or the gargantuan team that was so good and you had to worry about every year. I'm going to get, a little bit filtered as well. And most of that stems from the schedule. At the end of the year, we're going to look back and we're saying Florida's back. Is that what people were saying before the season? Because it's just such a tough schedule to navigate. Are they back enough to knock off one of those teams in this incredible tough stretch that they have? Yeah, they probably are, but I don't know that they're back in the way we think of like Urban Meyer back. All right, go ahead.
Nate Frazier as an all SEC running back, and I will add on a 1,000-yard rusher. Based on the way that Georgia has talked about running the football this fall, I'm going to say that's real. Or if you're a Georgia fan, that very much needs to be real because you can't give all this lip service to the importance of the running game and how much you need this to set up your team to be successful. And then not have a guy like Nate Frazier who has legitimate star potential deliver on that. I'm not saying that he's going to have like a Derrick Henry in 2015 type season, but Georgia hasn't had a 1,000-yard rusher since 2019. And while some of that is semantics, yes, Zamir White and James Cook, when they were at Georgia, are very talented running backs. You could say the same Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards when they were paired together. I think that Georgia, if this team, the way they've talked about running the football, Nate Frazier needs to develop into one of the best running backs in the SEC. I think he's got the talent to do that, and I think you're going to see that this season. So I believe that this is real, the Nate Frazier hype entering the 2025 season.
I want to agree with you there. I do worry, are we photoshopping, if we're talking about filters, are we photoshopping over the fumbles from last year? Are we tweaking a little bit the fact that, he's still a young guy and learning where to line up when it's pass coverage and you can't come off the field when it's an obvious passing down? Are we photoshopping there just to make him look a little bit better in our minds?
That is a very fair point to make. You'd have to look really closely. It's like one of those really well done Photoshops, not any of these AI nonsense. That is something in the fumbles. Like, I think more than anything, it is a mental thing more so than a physical defect. And that's just something Nate's got to lock in and improve on, because if that's an issue, I'm telling you right now, he's not going to hit 1,000 yards this season.
All right. So my next one, coming out of SEC Media Days, the SEC Media told us this, the Lenora Sellers, best quarterback in the Southeastern Conference.
To me, that is a filter. I'm a big fan of Garrett Nussmeier. I know he plays reckless sometimes. I know that he is a very aggressive quarterback. I know that he's already dealt with a little bit of an injury here during fall camp with some, I believe, patellar tendonitis, which just does not sound good at all. But I like what Garrett Nussmeier can do. And with Lenora Sellers, he makes the wow plays, and that's great. I don't love that you see him struggle to make the layups and do the easy things so well. And there's going to be so much pressure on Lenoris going into the season in terms of what he might potentially be able to do that you worry it might, similar to Carson Beck a season ago, who I think we said would have been the best quarterback in the SEC to start the year. I wonder if they're putting too much on his plate to start this season and carry a team that some have as a college football playoff contender, but because of their schedule, I just don't think they're quite going to get there. So I think that is a filter.
Yeah, I think they're replacing the entire offensive line there, new offensive coordinator for South Carolina, all things that are going to go against them. And you talked about the schedule for South Carolina. On October 4th, we may think Lenora Sellers is the best quarterback in the SEC, but on November 8th, we may be saying a different story. They go to LSU, they got Oklahoma, Alabama, and then go to Ole Miss. So that stretch of games is going to decide at the end of the year when we look back. The other part that could be filtered for me is there's so many good quarterbacks in the SEC. It seems like a deep quarterback group that by the end of the year, is he going to be the number one guy when it comes to SEC media picking the all first team? I don't see that happening. All right, your turn. Last one.
You're going to see a better Georgia team this year, even if the record doesn't necessarily reflect that. Georgia went 10-2 in the regular season last season. Won the SEC. And, as time goes by, maybe we remember that season more fondly with the big wins over Texas, the big home win over Tennessee late in the year. But I think just about every Georgia fan will tell you that last season was just a very unfun program to be around. And it was a slog on a week-by-week basis. There were not a lot of great blowout wins in that sense. I think this Georgia team this year is going to have a lot more fun. Now, the schedule sets up to be very difficult once again, and it is a younger football team, and so there's just going to be some mistakes that are made there. And look, there's a world or Georgia's 2-2 at the end of September. And those are, if that's the case, October is not going to be a very fun month. But I think this Georgia team is going to be fun. I think they're going to enjoy playing for each other a lot more. I think that's something they've really stressed and hit in on. And so I'm going to say that this team is going to be fun, and it's going to be real fun in 2025.
I can see them hitting, there were so many things last year, like you said, that were just frustrating, whether it was the drops or the Carson interceptions. It was just so many things that made it frustrating for Georgia fans that I do feel like this year we could see an explosive play down the field. We're going to see, some of those other big time moments, especially on the offensive side of the ball. The defensive side, they definitely had playmakers a year ago, but I do think, there's a chance for it. Even the wins last year, you were like, ugh. And so I feel like this year, those wins are going to be a lot more fun. It could be, I'll say real. It could be a much more fun Georgia team and a better Georgia team to watch. I'll end with this one, and I've kind of gone SEC for all of mine. Here's one. Ryan Grubb is the biggest addition to any SEC team this offseason. Of course, the new offensive coordinator at Alabama.
Filter. I know there's a lot to like about Ryan Grubb based on what happened at Washington, but Cody, do you know where he was coaching last year, Ryan Grubb?
The Seahawks, right?
Yeah, and they very promptly ran him out of town after a season where they couldn't really run the ball. And so, look, I get that he's a very accomplished offensive coordinator there at the college rank. I'm not quite buying what he brings to this Alabama team in terms of what they're going to do, because talent was not an issue for Alabama a season ago. It was the mental aspect there. And so maybe Ryan Grubb helps in that regard. But I don't see Ryan Grubb, and I may come to regret this, I don't see Ryan Grubb as some Todd Monken type coach who came in from the NFL, previously had college experience, didn't go to the way he wanted to in the NFL, and then comes back to college and light the world on fire. I'd be very surprised if that's what ends up happening with Ryan Grubb this season. If I'm going to go most impactful addition, I'll say John Mateer and his Venmo account in Oklahoma. I think that's a program that really needs to turn things around. Find some easy bets and hit on those. And I think that I feel comfortable saying Mateer is going to be that guy for the Sooners.
I got to believe if Kaylee was here this week, her meme machine would have been a John Mateer. She was eating that up the other day when all of that news broke. And that seems like something she's told me she has stalked people's Venmo accounts before just to see. And that's one of those things that I didn't realize, like, so much of that is like public. And so now I've gone back and I'm like, oh, a lot of people know all the babysitters I've ever, paid for, or guys I've given pizza money for. So it's one of those things that makes you think. I would say Ryan Grubb, to me, the argument was like, what are the impact transfers? Not a huge transfer. You got Jackson Arnold moved from, Oklahoma to Auburn. Is that a big impact? John Mateer. I think Zach Branch is probably up there for Georgia as well. I think Ryan Grubb, I don't know that Ty Simpson's going to be Michael Penix, but that's the last time we think of Grubb and Kalen DeBoer together. And so I was reading on website, he is the secret weapon. This is what's going to unlock Alabama. I don't know. I think this is one that's kind of weird too, because it'll be a couple years down the road that we're really going to see the impact, if there is one, to the play calling there. He is back reunited with Kalen DeBoer. So we'll say a little bit of a lipstick on that one, a filter as well. It's kind of a fun little exercise to do.
I like this. I'll be interested in seeing, Kaylee comes back, how she feels about this and what comes with there, because I have a feeling she's well-versed in the filters and everything that goes with that.
Are you a fan of filters?
I'm a no-filter lifestyle kind of guy, at least when it comes to my own social media. But
are you tweaking the photo at all? You editing contrast up, a little saturation?
I used to do that when I was younger, maybe a little bit less secure with myself. But as I've gotten older, you just learn to care a little bit less. And you'd rather be real than be filtered.
How do you feel about these old age filters? I put one on every now and I'll see people using it, and I'm like, what am I going to look at? I look exactly like my dad when I put these on. It is scary.
Those filters are close to AI, and I'm not a big AI fan, so we're gonna try and stay away from those.
You don't trust all of this stuff going on out there, huh?
Absolutely not. No, I've seen Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I know what happens.
You got to get on the good side of all of these bots, so when they do take over, I'm in favor with them. All right, appreciate Kaylee, and let me fill in for her this week. Connor being a part of it's a whole lot of fun. I've been able to fill in for her Also, Before the Hedges, if you missed that last night, you can go on our DawgNation YouTube channel and find that. Also, On the Beat, I'm on there every Monday night with Mike Griffith, and we'll be talking this next Monday. We'll talk more about what we're hearing from the scrimmage. We covered that a lot last week. And then DawgNation Daily will have all of that as well. Brandon Adams doing dual duty now as high school football has started. He's moonlighting as a high school football play-by-play announcer, and he's on here every morning, DawgNation Daily. Is that one of those things you would love to do, Connor? Call a play-by-play for a high school football game?
I would not. It's really difficult, and like much less you add on that BA is hosting DawgNation Daily every morning. I don't know how he does it. I am sure that it like seems like a great idea, and I know you've done it before. But I'd just be so terrified of saying some kid's name wrong, and then their parents are just jumping all over my email or phone number and just giving me help for it. Understandably so, because it's their big moment that their kid is on TV.
It is one of those things especially because you and I have played high school football, and you understand it's one of those things you want to get right. So you try to put effort into it. It is much harder prepping for a high school game than a college game where you can go watch every game the team has played and listen to other people talk about analysis and all those things. Very hard to prep for high school games, and you get the big board out there and no spotters, so you're trying to figure out what all these players are. So it is definitely an adventure. Good stuff right there. All right, that's going to do it for DawgNation at Large this week. I may see you back here next week. Who knows?